Commander Marcus Cole had been drifting in his damaged shuttle for 11 days when the alien vessel found him. Oxygen was running low and the water recycler had failed 3 days ago. So, when the massive crystalline ship appeared outside his viewport, Marcus did not know if he should feel relief or terror. He chose relief because terror required energy he no longer had. The ship was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. And Marcus had seen plenty of alien vessels during his years as a deep space explorer. This one looked like it had been grown rather than built, with sweeping curves of pale blue material that seemed to glow from within. Tendrils of light wrapped around his tiny shuttle and pulled it gently toward an opening in the hull. Marcus tried to send a distress signal one more time, but his communications array had been dead since the asteroid impact that had sent him tumbling into this unknown region of space. He was alone, and he was about to meet whoever lived inside that beautiful and terrifying ship. The docking process was smooth and quiet. Marcus felt a slight vibration as his shuttle settled onto what he assumed was a landing platform. And then everything went still. He checked his sidearm out of habit, knowing it would be useless against an entire alien crew. But the weight of it on his hip made him feel slightly less helpless. The airlock hissed open from the outside. Marcus had not touched the controls, which meant they had overridden his systems with ease. He stepped back and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. 3 figures entered his shuttle. They were tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like polished silver. Their eyes were large and multifaceted, catching the light in ways that made them look like living gemstones. They wore flowing robes of deep purple, and they moved with a grace that made Marcus feel clumsy just watching them. None of them spoke. They simply stared at him with expressions he could not read. One of them held up a small device that hummed softly, and Marcus felt a tingling sensation pass through his body. A medical scan. He guessed. The device beeped, and the alien who held it made a sound that might have been a gas ball. 3 of them took a step backward. Marcus lowered his hands slowly and tried to smile in a way that he hoped looked friendly rather than threatening. "I come in peace," he said, knowing the words were probably meaningless to them, but feeling like he should say something. The aliens exchanged glances with each other, and then 2 of them moved forward again. They gestured for Marcus to follow them, and he did because he had no other options. They led him through corridors that seemed to pulse with soft light, past doorways that opened and closed like living membranes. The air smelled clean and faintly sweet, and the temperature was comfortable wherever these beings came from. They had built their ship to be pleasant. Marcus found that oddly reassuring. They brought him to a room that was clearly meant for medical treatment. Strange machines lined the walls, and a bed made of some soft glowing material sat in the center. The aliens gestured for him to lie down, and Marcus hesitated for only a moment before complying. He was dehydrated and exhausted and probably injured in ways he had not yet noticed. If they wanted to help him, he was in no position to refuse. Small drones emerged from panels in the walls and began moving around him. They scanned and prodded and applied substances to his skin that made his cuts and bruises tingle. Marcus lay still and let them work, watching the ceiling and wondering what would happen next. That was when she entered the room. Marcus heard the door open and turned his head to see another alien standing in the doorway. She was different from the others. Her silver skin had a warmer tone to it, almost like moonlight on snow, and her eyes were not multifaceted like the others, but were instead solid pools of deep purple that seemed to hold entire galaxies within them. She wore robes of white and gold that marked her as someone important, and she carried herself with an authority that even Marcus could recognize. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, and Marcus found himself staring. Then their eyes met. The alien woman went completely rigid. Her skin, which had been that warm silver color, drained to a pale white in an instant. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus like she was seeing a nightmare made real. Like every fear she had ever known had suddenly taken physical form right in front of her. She spoke one word in a voice that trembled with something Marcus could not identify it. Might have been fear or shock or disbelief or all three combined, and then she turned and fled from the room. Medical drones continued their work as if nothing had happened. The other aliens in the room stood frozen, their large eyes fixed on the doorway through which the woman had disappeared. Marcus pushed himself up on his elbows and looked around in confusion. What just happened? He asked, not expecting an answer. He did not get one. The aliens avoided his gaze and hurried about their tasks with movements that seemed nervous and rushed. When the medical treatment was complete, they led him to a small room with a bed and a window that looked out into the stars. They left food and water and then sealed the door behind them. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of what he had experienced. The woman who had run from him was clearly someone important. Her robes and her bearing had made that obvious, but why had she reacted that way? He had done nothing threatening. He had just been lying there, letting the drones fix his wounds. What about him could possibly have caused such terror? He ate the food, which tasted strange but not unpleasant, and drank the water, which was cool and pure. Then he lay down and stared at the ceiling and wondered if he would ever see Earth again. Over the next few hours, Marcus learned a few things through observation and careful attention. The ship was called the Constellation of Lasting Peace, which he figured out when he saw the name displayed on a screen in his room. It was a diplomatic vessel of some kind, which explained why they had not simply destroyed his shuttle or left him to die. And the woman who had fled from him was Princess Valathkira, third heir to something called the Valanthi Dominion. He learned this last piece of information when two guards came to check on him, and one of them muttered something to the other that his slowly adapting ears managed to catch. A princess had looked at him like he was a monster. A princess had run from him like he was death itself. Marcus Cole had faced pirates and asteroids and the cold vacuum of space, but he had never scared anyone just by existing. He lay awake for a long time that night, turning the question over and over in his mind. What did she see when she looked at him? What did any of them see? He was just a man, a human, a survivor of a damaged shuttle who needed help. But they looked at him like he was something else entirely. The answer would come eventually. And when it did, Marcus would understand why the alien princess had frozen when she spotted him. But for now, he could only wait and wonder and hope that whatever came next would not be as terrifying as his hosts seemed to think he was. Marcus Cole was not a prisoner, but he was also not free. The Valanthi allowed him to move around his quarters and gave him food and water and even entertainment in the form of screens that displayed what he assumed were news programs and educational content. But whenever he approached the door, it remained sealed. And whenever he tried to communicate with anyone, they either ignored him or hurried away. Days passed like this. Marcus watched the aliens through observation windows and tried to learn their language by listening to their broadcasts. He was good with languages, always had been, and he started to pick up words and phrases faster than he expected. But understanding their words did not help him understand their behavior. They were afraid of him. That much was obvious from the way they moved when they were near his room, quick and nervous like prey animals who had spotted a predator. But Marcus was no predator. He was just a lost pilot who wanted to go home on the 5th day of his confinement. Something different happened. A Valanthi male approached his door and actually opened eyes. Was older than the others Marcus had seen, with silver skin that had darkened to a deep gray around his eyes and mouth. He wore robes of dark blue, covered in symbols that Marcus guessed meant he was some kind of scholar or scientist. The Alien stood in the doorway and studied Marcus with an expression that mixed curiosity with obvious fear. "I am Torvex," he said in heavily accented but understandable English. Marcus blinked in surprise and stood up slowly from his bed. "You speak my language?" "I have been studying your communications for many cycles," Torvex replied, keeping the doorway between them like a barrier. "Your species broadcast much into the void, and we have been listening for longer than you know." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine at those words. "How long have you been watching us?" Torvex made a gesture that might have been a shrug. "Long enough to learn your tongue, but not long enough to believe you were real." That made no sense to Marcus. So he asked a question that had been burning in his mind for days. "Why is everyone so afraid of me? I have done nothing to threaten anyone on this ship." Torvex was quiet for a long moment. His large purple eyes studied Marcus from head to toe, taking in every detail with scientific precision. "Your species," he finally said. "We believed you were myth. A story we tell our children so they will behave." Marcus almost laughed because the idea was so absurd. "We are a boogeyman?" The translator device Torvex wore on his collar flickered as it struggled with the unfamiliar word. But the scholar seemed to understand the meaning. "You are the Hollow Walkers. The Endlings, the ones who come from the Death World." "Death World?" Torvex nodded slowly. "Every spacefaring species has encountered planets that are hostile to life. Worlds with toxic atmospheres or extreme temperatures or constant geological instability. But your world is different." He paused and his skin paled slightly. "Your world has all of these things and more. Yet somehow life not only survived there, but thrived and became intelligent. And that should be impossible." Marcus thought about Earth. About the hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanoes. About the deserts and the frozen poles and the deep ocean trenches filled with crushing pressure and absolute darkness. He had never thought of his home as a death world. But when he considered it from an outside perspective, he could see how it might seem that way. "We adapted," he said. Simply. Torvex made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a whimper. "Adapted is not a strong enough word for what your species has done. You did not just adapt. You conquered, you dominated. You became the apex predator of a planet that produces apex predators, the way other worlds produce flowers." He pulled out a small device and projected images into the air between them. Marcus saw pictures of lions and sharks and wolves, creatures that he had grown up learning about in school. "These are the animals that share your world," Torvex said. "Any one of them would be considered a nightmare on most planets, yet your species hunted them, tamed them, and in some cases made them into companions." The image shifted to show a human walking a dog. "You bond with predators," Torvex whispered. "You form emotional connections with creatures that could kill you, and they choose not to because they love you. This is not normal behavior for any species we have ever encountered." Marcus looked at the image of the human and the dog and felt a pang of homesickness. "Dogs are wonderful," he said. "They are loyal and kind, and they make us happy." Torvex stared at him like he had just confirmed something terrible. "Your kind are said to pursue prey until it collapses from exhaustion." The scholar continued. "Is this true?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Persistence hunting. Yes, our ancestors did that. We are not the fastest or the strongest, but we can keep moving longer than almost anything else. You heal from wounds that should kill," Torvex said, his voice rising with each word. "You break bones and they mend. You lose blood and your body makes more. You cut yourself and the wound closes on its own. That is just how our bodies work. It is not how bodies should work." Torvex exclaimed. "Most species that suffer major trauma simply die. That is the natural order, but your kind refused to die. You survive things that would kill any other intelligent being in the galaxy." He was breathing heavily now. Clearly distressed by the conversation, Marcus held up his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "We are not monsters. We are just people." Torvex laughed then. A sharp and bitter sound. "You eat the flesh of other creatures and call it cuisine. Many species eat meat. Many species eat meat to survive," Torvex corrected him. "Your species has developed the ability to survive on plants alone. Yet you choose to continue eating flesh because you enjoy the taste. You have turned predation into an art form." Marcus had no response to that because it was technically accurate. Torvex turned off his projection device and took a step backward. "Now you understand why the princess fled when she saw you. Now you understand why everyone on this ship looks at you with fear in their eyes. You are not a person to us. You are a legend, a nightmare. A warning made real." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "I came here because I wanted to see for myself if the stories were true. I thought perhaps our ancestors had exaggerated, that no species could really be as terrifying as the tales described." He looked back at Marcus with those large purple eyes. "I was wrong. You are exactly what the stories say. And that is more frightening than I can express." Then he was gone, and the door sealed behind him. Leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts, he sat down heavily on the bed and stared at the wall. All his life he had thought of humans as ordinary, as just one more species struggling to find their place in a vast and uncaring universe. But to the Volanthi, to the countless other species out there in the stars, humans were not ordinary at all. They were the monsters that parents warned their children about. They were the death that came from the death world and princess. Valethkira had looked at him and seen all of that in a single glance. Marcus thought about the way she had frozen, the way her skin had gone white, the way she had fled like her life depended on it. She had not seen a lost pilot in need of help. She had seen a predator, a survivor, a creature forged by a world that killed everything weak and kept only the strong. And somewhere deep in a part of his mind he did not like to examine, Marcus wondered if maybe she was right. The first time Princess Valethkira returned to sea, Marcus was exactly 8 days after she had fled from him. He was sitting by the window, watching the stars drift past when the door opened, and she stepped inside. Marcus turned to look at her, and she flinched. But this time she did not run. She stood, just inside the doorway with her hands clasped in front of her and her chin held high like she was trying to prove she was not afraid. Marcus could see her trembling. "Please," he said softly. "Sit down if you want. I will not hurt you." Valethkira remained standing, but she took one small step further into the room. "I have been watching you," she said, and her voice was surprisingly steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Through the security systems. I have watched everything you have done since you arrived on this ship." Marcus nodded slowly. "I figured someone was watching. You talk to the medical drones," she said. "You ask them questions and tell them stories, even though they cannot respond. Why do you do this?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. "I guess I just like having someone to talk to, even if that someone is a machine. Being alone gets lonely after a while." Valethkira tilted her head in a gesture that Marcus had come to recognize as confusion. "You feel loneliness?" "Of course I do. Humans are social creatures. We need connection with others. It is part of who we are." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "The stories say your kind are solitary hunters who need no one. The stories are wrong," Marcus said with a gentle smile. "We hunt in groups more often than alone. We build families and communities and entire civilizations based on working together. No human has ever achieved anything great completely on their own." Valethkira took another step into the room. "Tell me about your world." And so Marcus did over the following weeks. The princess returned again and again. Each visit she stayed a little longer and stood a little closer. Marcus told her about Earth, about the oceans and mountains and forests, about cities that glittered with light and small, towns where everyone knew their neighbors. He told her about rain and snow and the way the sky turned orange and pink at sunset. He showed her pictures on his personal device, images he had saved from home that he looked at when he felt lost. Valethira stared at a photo of a beach with wonder in her eyes. "You willingly enter those waters?" she asked. "Bodies of liquid filled with predators?" Marcus laughed softly. "We call it going to the beach. It is one of our favorite activities. We swim and play in the waves and build castles out of sand." "Castles out of sand?" "Temporary structures just for fun. They wash away when the tide comes in, but that is part of the joy. We make something beautiful, knowing it will not last." Valethira considered this for a long time. That is a very strange way to think about creation. "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But it teaches us to appreciate the moment, to find happiness in things even when they are temporary." Another day she asked about the seasons, and Marcus explained how Earth tilted on its axis and created periods of warmth and cold. "Your planet has seasons of death where vegetation dies and temperatures plummet," she said with horror in her voice. "And you simply endure this?" "We call it winter," Marcus replied. "And honestly, some people prefer it. There is something beautiful about snow covering everything in white, about sitting by a fire while the wind howls outside, about the way the world goes quiet." "That sounds terrifying." "It can be," Marcus admitted, "but it can also be magical. My daughter used to love making snow angels." Valethira went very still. "You have offspring?" Marcus felt his heart clench at the memory. "I have a daughter. Her name is Emma. She is 12 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness." He pulled up a photo on his device and showed it to the princess. It was a picture of a young girl with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile, standing in front of a Christmas tree decorated with lights and ornaments. "She is beautiful," Valethira said softly. "She is everything," Marcus replied, and his voice cracked just slightly. "She is the reason I need to get home." Something changed in Valethira's expression, then the fear that had lived in her eyes since the first moment she saw him began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like understanding. "You love her," she said, "more than anything in the universe. The stories do not mention that your kind can love." Marcus looked up at her with sadness in his eyes. "The stories do not know us at all." From that day forward, Valethira began to see Marcus differently. She started to notice the small things. The way he thanked the drones when they brought him food. The way he carefully put his dishes back in the collection slot instead of leaving them scattered around. The way he kept his space tidy and organized. She noticed how he exercised every day to keep his body healthy. Not training for violence, but simply maintaining himself with quiet discipline. She noticed how he looked at the stars with longing rather than hunger. How he traced patterns in the viewport with his finger and whispered names she did not recognize. "What are you doing?" she asked one evening. "Looking for Earth," he replied. "I know it is too far away to see from here, but I look anyway. It makes me feel closer to home. You miss it very much. Every single moment of every single day." Valethira sat down next to him, closer than she had ever been before. "I'm sorry we have kept you confined here." "It was not the right thing to do." Marcus shook his head. "You were afraid. I understand that now. If someone from a legendary nightmare species showed up on a human ship, we would probably react the same way. Would you?" "Maybe at first," Marcus admitted, "but I like to think we would eventually try to understand, to look past the fear and see the person underneath." Valethira was quiet for a moment. "That is what I am trying to do. I know, and I appreciate it more than you can imagine." She turned to face him fully, and for the first time she did not flinch when she met his eyes. "We are not what your stories say," Marcus told her softly. We can be violent, yes, we have hurt each other plenty throughout our history. But we also write poetry and create art and compose music that makes us weep with its beauty. He pulled up more images on his device. Paintings and sculptures and photographs of concerts and festivals. We raise orphaned animals and nurse them back to health. We travel across our entire planet just to see a sunset from a different angle. We build hospitals to heal the sick and schools to teach the young. Valithkira looked at the images with wonder. Then why? She asked quietly. Do you survive so fiercely? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. Because we found things worth surviving for. Our families, our friends, our dreams and hopes. The people we love and the futures we want to build. He looked at the photo of Emma still glowing on his screen. I did not survive 11 days in that broken shuttle because I am some unstoppable predator. I survived because I have a daughter who's waiting for me to come home. And I refuse to let her grow up without a father. Valithkira reached out and, for the first time, touched his hand. Her silver fingers were cool against his skin. But the gesture was warm. I think I understand now, she said. Understand what? She looked at him with eyes that no longer held fear. Why my people tell stories about yours. It is not because you are monsters. It is because you are miraculous. You come from a world that should have destroyed you. Yet you did not just survive. You became something beautiful. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. That might be the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. Valithkira smiled. And it was the first time he had seen her smile. I would like to help you get home to your daughter. I would like that very much. And in that moment, sitting side by side, watching the stars drift past, the predator and the princess began to build something neither of them had expected, a friendship that would change everything. The alarm tore through the ship like a scream. Marcus bolted upright from his bed. His body instantly alert in the way that only a soldier's could be. Red light pulsed through his quarters, and a voice spoke rapidly over the intercom in Volanti. Words he had learned well enough to understand. Emergency. Colony under attack. All personnel to stations. He was at the door before he even realized he was moving. But of course, the door remained sealed. He pounded on it with his fist. Let me out. He shouted, What is happening? For a long moment, there was no response. And then the door slid open to reveal Valithkira. Standing in the corridor, her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with something that was not fear of him. This was a different kind of terror altogether. The Skef Collective, she said, her voice tight. They have attacked one of our colonies. We are the nearest vessel. Marcus had heard that name before in his conversations with Torvex. A brutal expansionist empire that conquered and consumed. That took what they wanted and destroyed what they did not need. How bad is it? The colony has gone silent, Valithkira replied. We fear the worst. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. And through the viewport at the end of the corridor, Marcus could see a planet burning. Fires dotted the surface like wounds. Great plumes of smoke rising into the atmosphere. Even from orbit, he could see the devastation. Take me with you, Marcus said. Valithkira stared at him. What? Take me down there. I can help. I was a soldier before I became an explorer. I know how to fight. You cannot be serious. Your people are dying down there, Marcus said. And his voice was hard with determination. I may be a nightmare to you, but I can be a nightmare to your enemies too. For a heartbeat, Valithkira hesitated. And then she nodded once. Come with me. They ran through corridors filled with chaos. Volanthi crew members rushing to their posts while alerts blared overhead. They reached the shuttle bay where a team of soldiers was preparing to descend to the surface. The soldiers froze when they saw Marcus. Princess, the commander said, his voice carefully neutral. What is the meaning of this? He's coming with us, Valithkira replied in a tone that allowed no argument. He has combat experience, and he has volunteered. The commander looked at Marcus with barely concealed terror in his eyes. But he nodded. Very well. The descent was rough. The shuttle shook and bucked as it passed through the smoke-filled atmosphere. And through the windows Marcus could see the full scale of the destruction below. The colony had been a beautiful place once, with elegant spires and gleaming domes arranged in patterns that pleased the eye now. Half of those spires lay in ruins and the domes were cracked, open like broken eggs. They landed near a cluster of buildings that were still standing, and Marcus was the first one out of the shuttle. The air smelled like burning, and death. Volanthe survivors emerged from hiding places. Civilians who looked at the soldiers with desperate hope, but when they saw Marcus, that hope turned to confusion and fear. Help them, Valethkira ordered her soldiers. Get them to the shuttle. The soldiers moved to comply, gathering the survivors and guiding them towards safety. Marcus scanned the area with trained eyes, looking for threats, looking for enemies. He found a group of Sketh hunters emerged from behind a collapsed building, their weapons raised. They were tall and insectoid, with hard shells and too many limbs, and they moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. The Volanthe soldiers raised their weapons, but Marcus could see them hesitating, their training warring with their fear. The Sketh outnumbered them 3-1, and were better armed. Protocol would say retreat and wait for reinforcements. Marcus did not care about protocol. He grabbed a weapon from the nearest soldier's holster and walked toward the Sketh. Human, Valethkira called out. What are you doing? Marcus did not answer. He just kept walking. The Sketh noticed him and paused, their compound eyes tracking this strange creature that approached them without fear. One of them made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. The largest of them raised its weapon and fired. Marcus moved. The shot passed through the space where he'd been standing a moment before. But Marcus was no longer there. He was rolling, ducking, weaving through the debris with a speed and agility that the Sketh had not expected. He came up behind the first one and fired twice, dropping it before it could turn. Then he was moving again, never staying in one place, never giving them a clear target. The Sketh were warriors, but they were not used to prey that fought back. They were not used to a creature that refused to die. Marcus took a hit to his left arm and felt the burn of it. But he did not stop. He kept moving, kept fighting, using cover and terrain and every trick he had learned in years of combat. One by one, the Sketh fell. The last one tried to run, but Marcus was faster. He caught up to it and brought it down with a tackle that would have shattered the bones of a lesser creature. The Sketh thrashed and clicked in what might have been fear, and Marcus pinned it to the ground with one knee. Where are the others? He demanded. How many more of you are there? The Sketh did not answer, could not answer, because Volanthe translators did not work on Sketh language. Marcus let it go and watched it scramble away into the smoke. He stood there breathing heavily, blood dripping from his wounded arm, surrounded by the bodies of enemies he had killed with borrowed weapons and human stubbornness. When he turned around, the Volanthe soldiers were staring at him. Their weapons hung loose in their hands, and their eyes were wide with something that went beyond fear. They had heard the stories about humans. Now they had seen those stories come to life. Valethkira stepped forward slowly, her gaze fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You are injured, she said. Marcus looked at his arm where the Sketh weapon had burned through his sleeve and seared his flesh. It will heal, he said. Kept fighting even after you were hit. There were still enemies. Stopping was not an option. She reached out and touched his wounded arm gently, and Marcus winced but did not pull away. The stories are true, she whispered. You are everything they said and more. I am just a man who wanted to protect people. Valethkira shook her head slowly. No, you are so much more than that. They found more survivors as they moved through the colony, huddled in basements and hidden rooms. Waiting for death that had not yet come for them, Marcus led the way, scouting ahead, clearing buildings, doing the dangerous work while the Volante soldiers secured the civilians behind him every time they encountered Sketh. The result was the same. The aliens who had terrorized a dozen species fled from a single human who refused to give up. Word spread through the Sketh forces like fire. Something was hunting them. Something that could not be stopped. Something that came out of the smoke and shadow and killed without mercy by the time reinforcements arrived from other Volante ships. The Sketh hunting parties had retreated to their vessels and fled the system. Entirely, Marcus stood in the medical bay of the constellation, of lasting peace while drones worked to seal his wounds. Had taken 3 more hits during the rescue operations. Burns and cuts that would have killed most Volante. But he was still standing, still breathing, still a Levavalagora watched him from the doorway. Just as she had on that first day, but this time she was not frozen with fear. Now you know, Marcus said tiredly. Now you have seen what we really are. She stepped into the room and walked toward him until she was standing close enough to touch. Yes, she said softly. I have. Marcus waited for her to say something about monsters and nightmares. About the horror she must be feeling after watching him kill instead. She said something he never expected. I saw a creature, forged by a death world, who used that terrible strength to protect strangers he owed nothing. Till she met his eyes and held his gaze without flinching. I froze when I first saw you because I recognized what you were. A predator, a survivor, something my people have feared for thousands of years. She reached up and touched his face gently. What I did not expect was that you would also be kind. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Some wall he had built to protect himself crumbling away. I am not a monster, he said. No, Valithkira agreed. You are not. She smiled at him, and there was no fear left in her eyes at all. You are something far more frightening to our enemies, and far more wonderful to those you protect. For the first time since he had arrived on this ship, Marcus Cole felt like maybe everything would be okay. The footage could not be contained. Someone had recorded everything. From the moment Marcus walked toward the Sketh hunting party to the moment the last of them fled into the smoke. That recording spread across the Volante Dominion like wildfire, jumping from ship to ship and colony to colony until billions of beings had witnessed what a single human could do. Reactions were mixed. Some watched with horror, seeing their ancient nightmares confirmed in vivid detail. Others watched with something closer to awe, seeing a creature from legend step out of myth and into reality. And a precious few, watched with hope because if the Death Worlders were real, and if they could be allies instead of enemies, then perhaps the galaxy was not as dark and dangerous as everyone had always believed. The Sketh Collective issued a formal protest to the Volante High Council, demanding that the unstable Death Worlder be restrained or eliminated. They called Marcus a war criminal and a menace and a threat to galactic stability. They demanded justice for their fallen warriors. The Volante High Council read the protest and did something that surprised everyone. They laughed. Then they issued a formal response that was broadcast across every communications network in known space. The Volante Dominion hereby extends a formal invitation to the species known as humanity. We wish to open diplomatic relations and establish peaceful contact between our peoples. The message reached Earth 3 weeks later. Marcus knew this because Valithkira burst into his quarters with tears streaming down her silver face and threw her arms around him. They said yes, she cried. Your people received our message, and they said yes. Marcus held her tight and felt tears of his own sliding down his cheeks. I am going home? Better than that, Valithkira said. pulling back to look at him. "You are going home as the ambassador of the first official contact between our species. My father himself requested that you be the one to represent us to your people." Marcus laughed, a sound of pure joy that he had not made in months. "Me, an ambassador? You saved hundreds of Volanti lives. You showed my people that humans are not the monsters we feared. Who better to bridge the gap between our worlds?" The journey to Earth took 6 weeks. Marcus spent most of that time preparing, learning diplomatic protocols and studying Volanti, history and culture so he could represent them properly. Valis helped him, spending hours each day teaching him the nuances of her language and the intricacies of her society. Somewhere during those long hours, something changed between them. It happened slowly at first. Small touches that lingered a moment too long. Glances that held more meaning than words could express. Then one night, as they sat together watching the stars stream past the viewport, Valithkira reached out and took his hand. "I do not want you to leave," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her. At this alien woman who had gone from fearing him to trusting him to something that felt like more. "Then come with me," he said. Her eyes widened. "To Earth? Why not? You said yourself that I am supposed to bridge the gap between our peoples. Having a Volanti princess at my side would certainly help with that." Valithkira was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus worried that he had overstepped then. She smiled, that beautiful smile that had become so precious to him. "I would like that very much." Earth appeared in the viewport like a blue and green jewel against the black velvet of space. Marcus pressed his hand against the glass and felt tears sliding down his face. Home. He was finally home. The landing site had been prepared in advance. A clear space in what the humans called Switzerland, where representatives from every nation had gathered to witness the historic moment. The shuttle touched down gently, and Marcus took a deep breath. "Ready?" he asked Valithkira. She squeezed his hand. "Ready." The ramp lowered, and Marcus Cole stepped onto Earth for the first time in almost a year. The crowd that had gathered was enormous. Thousands of humans filling the space around the landing zone, held back by barriers and security personnel. They fell silent when they saw him. Marcus walked forward with Valithkira at his side. Two figures from different worlds, standing together under the blue sky of Earth. He approached the podium that had been set up, where world leaders and diplomats waited with expressions that ranged from hope to fear to barely contained excitement. Marcus looked out at the sea of human faces and felt a weight settle onto his shoulders. This moment would shape the future of two species. He needed to get it right. "My name is Marcus Cole," he began, his voice amplified across the crowd. "I am a commander in the Earth Space Exploration Course. And about a year ago, my shuttle was damaged, and I found myself drifting alone in an unknown region of space." He paused and looked at Valithkira. "I was rescued by the Volanti Dominion, a civilization that spans hundreds of star systems and has existed for thousands of years. And I learned something during my time with them that I think all of humanity needs to hear." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on his every word. "They were afraid of us," murmurs rippled through the assembled humans. "For generations, the Volanti and countless other species have told stories about Earth. They call it a death world, a planet so hostile that no intelligent life should be able to survive there. And yet we did." He gestured to the sky above him. "To the beings out there among the stars, we are legends. We are the creatures that bond with predators and eat the flesh of other animals for pleasure. We are the ones who keep moving when we should fall, who heal when we should die, who survive against all odds simply because we refuse to give up." Marcus looked at Valithkira again, and she nodded encouragingly. "The first time the princess of the Volanti Dominion saw me, she froze in terror and fled. I did not understand why until I learned what we represent to the galaxy. And I spent a long time wondering if they were right to fear us." He turned back to the crowd. Then I watched as the Volanthi colony was attacked by an enemy that shows no mercy. I watched as innocent people died while soldiers hesitated. And I realized something important. His voice grew stronger. Yes, we are everything the stories say. We come from a world that tried to kill us in 1,000 different ways, and we survived anyway. We are persistent and stubborn and terrifyingly resilient. He smiled then, a smile full of warmth and hope. But we are also so much more than that. We write poetry that makes each other weep. We create art that captures the beauty of a single moment. We cross oceans and climb mountains just to see what is on the other side. Marcus reached out and took Valethkira's hand, lifting it high where everyone could see. We build friendships across the impossible distance between stars. We find connection with beings so different from ourselves that they once thought we were monsters. And we do this because we are not just survivors. His voice rang out across the crowd. We are survivors who choose to love. The silence stretched for a heartbeat. And then the crowd erupted, cheering, and applause filled the air. Humans celebrating not just first contact, but the revelation of who they truly were. Marcus looked out at his people and felt pride swelling in his chest. They were not monsters. They were not nightmares. They were the children of a death world who had looked into the void and refused to be destroyed. Not with hatred or violence, but with hope and love and stubborn determination. And now they would take their place among the stars later that evening. After the speeches and ceremonies were finished, Marcus found himself standing in a quiet garden with Valethkira at his side. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the alien princess gasp with wonder. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Marcus agreed. "But not as beautiful as some things." She turned to look at him, and he saw in her eyes the same warmth that burned in his own heart. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build something new. Together, not just you and me, but our entire species. We take the best of what we are, and we share it with the galaxy." He pulled her close and held her tight. "And we show them that the creatures from the death world are not something to fear, but something to cherish." Valethkira smiled and rested her head against his chest. "I think I knew that from the moment you asked the medical drones if they wanted to hear a joke." Marcus laughed. To be fair, it was a very good joke, far above them. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Out there, among those distant points of light, billions of beings were watching and waiting to see what would happen next. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, not as conquerors or monsters, but as survivors who had found things worth surviving for. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the legend of the Death Worlders was being rewritten. They were not nightmares. They were not myths. They were something far more powerful. They were hope. Marcus Cole looked up at the stars with his alien princess beside him and smiled. The universe would never be the same, and that was exactly how it should be. The end.